Iran and Israel, separated by 1,000 miles of desert, mountains and history, are two nations whose destinies have become inextricably linked. Though they share no border, their animosity has shaped the very landscape of the Middle East for generations. Today, they are locked in a conflict that is as much about ideology and survival as it is about territory or power. This is a struggle that now threatens to engulf not just the Middle East, but to draw in global powers and destabilize the world order itself. For decades their shadow war simmered beneath the surface, fought in the shadows by spies, proxies and secret deals. Assassinations, cyberattacks and sabotage became the language of their rivalry, as both sides maneuvered for advantage without tipping into all-out war. But in the summer of 2025, the fragile balance shattered. Suddenly missiles streaked across the night sky, drones buzzed overhead, and fighter jets roared over ancient cities. The world watched in horror as the conflict erupted into open warfare, threatening to spiral out of control. At the center of this escalation stands Donald Trump. His dramatic return to the White House has added fuel to an already raging fire, sending shockwaves through capitals from Washington to Tehran. Years earlier, Trump tore up the Iran nuclear deal, vowing to negotiate a tougher agreement, but that promise faded, leaving a vacuum filled by mistrust and rising tensions. His bold rhetoric, unpredictable decisions, and threats of overwhelming force have redrawn the lines of engagement, emboldening hardliners on both sides and making compromise seem impossible. Now, his demands for unconditional surrender echo across the region, broadcast on every screen, fueling fear and uncertainty among millions. This story traces the Iran-Israel conflict from its surprising origins as a secret alliance through decades of covert hostility to the open war that now threatens to reshape the region. We'll examine how Trump's worldview, his policies and his personal ambitions have pushed both sides to the brink, and why his actions matter far beyond the Middle East. Why does this feud matter so much to the world? Because the fate of millions, and perhaps the stability of the entire planet, hangs in the balance. The risks are staggering: a wider regional war, the specter of nuclear catastrophe, and the possibility of a global economic collapse that could touch every life on Earth. The answers to these urgent questions may lie in the choices made by leaders in Tehran and Jerusalem, choices shaped by history, pride, and fear, and perhaps most unpredictably, in the mind of the man now sitting in the Oval Office, whose next move could determine the fate of us all. There was a time, not so long ago, when Iran and Israel were not enemies, but rather discreet allies in a turbulent Middle East. Their partnership was built on shared interests and mutual concerns, quietly shaping the region's politics behind closed doors. Before the seismic events of 1979, Iran's Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, maintained open diplomatic and economic ties with Israel. Both nations, wary of rising Arab nationalism and Soviet influence, found common ground in intelligence sharing, trade, and even military cooperation. Their relationship was pragmatic, driven by the need to counterbalance powerful adversaries in the region. But the 1979 Islamic Revolution upended this delicate alliance. Ayatollah Khomeini's new regime declared Israel an illegitimate state, labeling it the Little Satan, and making anti-Zionism a central pillar of Iranian foreign policy. Overnight, former partners became bitter adversaries, and the region's balance of power shifted dramatically. Iran began to project its influence through a network of proxy militias, most notably Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. By funding, arming and training these groups, Iran sought to challenge both Israeli and American interests, forming what became known as the Axis of Resistance. This strategy allowed Iran to wage indirect war, keeping its own forces out of direct confrontation while destabilizing its rivals. Israel, alarmed by Iran's growing regional reach and its pursuit of advanced nuclear technology, began to view the Islamic Republic as its most formidable and existential threat. The specter of a nuclear-armed Iran drove Israel to invest heavily in intelligence, missile defense and preemptive strategies. In response, Israel launched a shadow war, deploying cyberattacks, targeted assassinations and sabotage operations deep inside Iran. These covert actions aimed to cripple Iran's nuclear ambitions, but they also fueled a dangerous cycle of retaliation and deepened the mistrust between the two nations. What began as a regional rivalry has now escalated onto the world stage. The threat of nuclear proliferation, international sanctions and global diplomatic standoffs have made the Iran-Israel conflict a matter of urgent concern for the entire international community. Decades of proxy wars, ideological hostility, and a relentless arms race have brought the two countries to the brink of open conflict. Each new escalation risks igniting a wider war that could engulf the entire region. The nuclear dimension has transformed this rivalry from a regional struggle into a global security crisis, drawing in world powers and raising the stakes for everyone. Now, with military forces on high alert and diplomatic channels strained, the stage is set for direct clashes, threatening not just the Middle East, but the fragile peace of the world itself. After the collapse of the 2015 nuclear deal, hopes for a diplomatic solution faded rapidly. The international community watched as years of painstaking negotiations unraveled almost overnight, leaving a dangerous vacuum in their wake. Iran responded by accelerating its nuclear program, ramping up uranium enrichment and expanding its facilities at an unprecedented pace. The government insisted its intentions were peaceful, but the world grew increasingly skeptical. International inspectors reported that Iran was now closer than ever to weapons capability, raising alarms in capitals across the globe. The margin for error was shrinking, and the stakes had never been higher. Israel, determined to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran, launched a series of bold and covert assassinations targeting Iranian officials and top nuclear scientists. Each strike sent shockwaves through the region, pushing both nations to the brink and risking all-out war. In early 2025, the conflict escalated dramatically. Israel carried out direct strikes on Revolutionary Guard bases deep inside Iran, a move that shattered years of shadow warfare and proxy conflict, and marked a dangerous new phase. Under immense pressure and public outrage, Iran abandoned its long-standing policy of strategic patience. The government began openly mobilizing its military, preparing for large-scale retaliation and signaling that it would no longer hold back. Around the world, anxious citizens watched breaking news as diplomatic efforts stalled. Regional actors braced for the fallout, fearing that the conflict could spill over and ignite a much wider war in the Middle East. The United States urged restraint, but its influence was limited by years of mistrust. Meanwhile, Russia and China openly blamed American policy for the crisis, deepening global divisions and complicating any hope for a peaceful resolution. Despite mounting warnings from the international community, both Iran and Israel appeared locked on a collision course. Neither side showed any willingness to back down, and the threat of direct confrontation loomed larger with each passing day. The spiral of escalation seemed unstoppable, as tit-for-tat attacks and military posturing pushed the region closer to the edge. The world held its breath, fearing the outbreak of a catastrophic war. The fuse was lit for direct war, and the consequences would soon be felt far beyond the region. In 2018, President Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Iran nuclear deal, calling it fatally flawed. He imposed maximum pressure sanctions, aiming to force Iran into a better agreement. Instead, Iran's economy suffered, hardliners gained power, and Tehran restarted its nuclear activities. Critics warned that abandoning the deal would backfire, and it did. The U.S. lost leverage, and Iran moved closer to nuclear capability. Trump's actions removed the main guardrail against Iran's nuclear ambitions, setting the stage for today's crisis. The maximum pressure campaign failed to bring Iran to the table, but succeeded in making the region more volatile. The seeds of today's war were sown in these decisions. In June 2025, the shadow war erupted into open conflict. Israeli airstrikes hit over 20 Iranian military and nuclear sites, including targets in Tehran. Iran responded with hundreds of missiles and drones, overwhelming Israeli defenses and causing civilian casualties. The human toll is staggering: hundreds dead, thousands wounded, and mass panic in both countries. Iran imposed a communications blackout as families fled the capital. High-profile assassinations of Iranian commanders by Israel further escalated tensions. Iran's supreme leader vowed no surrender, fueling a deadly tit-for-tat. Diplomatic efforts have failed to halt the terrifying momentum. Back in the White House, Trump claims the U.S. has complete and total control of the skies over Iran, a signal of deep American involvement. He demands Iran's unconditional surrender, threatening its leadership directly and using psychological warfare to destabilize Tehran. Trump's approach is a sharp break from Biden's preference for de-escalation and alliance building. He leaves a narrow door open for diplomacy, but only on his terms, after Iran capitulates. His all-or-nothing stance leaves little room for compromise, making a diplomatic solution elusive. Trump insists he's not seeking war, but his red line is clear: Iran must never get a nuclear weapon. The devastation is seen as a necessary evil to dismantle Iran's nuclear program. This high-stakes gamble defines Trump's second act in this crisis. The Iran-Israel war sends shockwaves across the globe. The risk of a wider regional war is real, with U.S. troops and bases vulnerable to Iranian retaliation. The nuclear threat looms. Israeli strikes have damaged Iran's facilities, but enough enriched uranium remains for several bombs. A desperate Iran might race for a nuclear weapon, forcing the world into an unthinkable dilemma. Economic fallout is immediate. oil prices surge, and the Strait of Hormuz, a vital choke point, is at risk. Any disruption could trigger a global recession, raising prices worldwide. The G7 calls for de-escalation, while China and Russia maneuver for advantage. This is not a distant conflict, it's a crisis touching global security, nuclear proliferation, and economic stability. The world watches, anxious and uncertain. We stand at a crossroads. The Iran-Israel war could mark a permanent shift in the global order, or just another brutal chapter in Middle Eastern conflict. Trump's unpredictable, high-pressure tactics have shattered old rules, but could also risk catastrophic miscalculation. History suggests even the most dangerous crises can de-escalate, but exhaustion and back-channel talks may be the only way out. The world's powers are desperate to avoid wider war and economic collapse. The future depends on the choices of a few key leaders in Tehran, Jerusalem, and Washington. The international system's fragility is exposed. The nuclear age makes every misstep perilous. The world hopes for restraint but braces for the possibility that this is the dawn of something far more dangerous.